Welcome, Tom, Lisa, thank you very much indeed both for being here. Can I just ask you first of all, what's your take on that, a short extension? Where will it get us, Lisa?
Well, I think it gets you to no deal, because a short extension makes sense if what you're trying to do is get something passed by the House of Commons and get all the associated legislation through. But given that the Prime Minister hasn't budged an inch on any of the requests that have been made of the government over the last 4 months, seems to me nothing will change in that time. So a short extension makes sense to me, but not without any kind of purpose. And so we're back in the same Groundhog Day we've been in for the last few months. We're basically running the clock down until we get to the next cliff edge, but the next cliff edge does look like it's the final cliff edge.
You're going to vote for the deal if she brings it back.
I voted for it twice, I will vote for it again, yeah.
But she would need a period of implementation to get it in.
Fine, that's not the same thing though. If she needs, look, if she can get...
That is what she's asked for, a period of implementation to implement the deal.
Well, not quite. The letter is slightly vaguer than that. The letter asks for more time. There is really no point in having more decision time.
She's arguing she needs this extension in order to implement her deal. You think she's just going to spin it out and keep trying more meaningful votes that don't work?
Let me just tell you what I think, rather than going through that. I think that if you can't take a decision by the 29th of March, then frankly there's no point in having more time. I mean, there is one purpose to have 650 people elected to Parliament from across this United Kingdom, and that's to take decisions on behalf of their communities and to be responsible for those decisions, and then be re-elected or not be re-elected depending on how the community feels about it. Extending the time doesn't help anybody, it doesn't make the decisions easier, it doesn't make them go away. Just take the damn decision, back or don't back the deal, and live with the consequences.
Lisa, you've had some contact with the Prime Minister. She's still trying to win you over to her side, to back the deal when the vote comes back.
Well, I don't think she is, actually. So I've had a number of meetings with her face-to-face, and she rang me weekend before last. But it was a phone call that was really about checking in to see if I'd changed my mind, rather than trying to have any kind of dialogue about what she might be able to do to support people like me to vote for it.
That might be the Prime Minister in full converting mode. She's not meant to be that good at it.
I mean, she's very pleasant. She appreciate the fact that she's taking the time to ring round and ask for people's votes, and it seems to me that sort of constructive approach would have been really helpful a couple of years ago, and is still needed now, and is welcome. But the problem is that from the first time that I had a conversation with her, which was in January, I've told her that the reason I can't vote for this deal as it currently stands is because there is no deal. The withdrawal agreement is fine, but it's a legal text that basically settles some fundamental questions.
It's the divorce deal.
Before we move on to actually negotiating the future
and you want certainty about that?
Well, that's the key thing. That is the thing that will determine whether I still have jobs in my constituency, and what sort of jobs those are, what people are paid, how they're treated, all of the things that we've fought for and built up over 100 years. And so I've been clear with her since day one. If she wants my vote, she has to give Parliament not just a role, but a vote on that future trading relationship. Now, it seems to me that's not a big ask, actually. I mean, this is fundamentally going to reset our relationship with the rest of the world, and there ought to be right for Parliament to have a say on that. But at the moment, she's still resisting. And for 4 months, we've been going round and round in circles, talking about this, but with no commitments at all. With the last conversation I had with her, she said, of course, parliamentarians have the right to express their views. I've been an MP for nearly 10 years. I do know that I'm allowed to speak in the House of Commons chamber, but actually what I want is a vote. I think all parliamentarians should be asking for that, frankly. It's not right that one individual, whoever that Prime Minister happens to be, can go off after this agreement is passed and negotiate our trading relationship with the rest of the world by themselves. There has to be a role for Parliament in that process.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree, and I think it will happen. I mean, the reason I disagree with Lisa slightly on this is because, I mean, of course, she's absolutely right. This is a transitionary agreement. It doesn't guarantee anything in the future. You're absolutely right, Lisa. But the truth is that the way, I mean, let's be honest, the way that the government has conducted these negotiations for the last 2 years has demonstrated the failure of a single party approach to such a massive question. I mean, it's demonstrated it extremely clearly. And the idea that we can play party politics with this agreement, or indeed with the continued question of Europe, it's for the birds. It's simply not true.
Well, particularly because the political parties, all of us, are completely divided on the issue. So,
but these are...
for obvious reasons. I mean, the public is divided. You know, if you come to Wigan, you'll get a very different view than, you know, when I went to Stella Creasy's constituency in Walthamstow. People feel very differently about it, and we're reflecting that in the debate, which means you've got to take a cross-party approach.
But I agree with you, Lisa, and that's why I think that the reality is, you know, I mean, I could agree with almost everything you said on the Prime Minister's deal, and I'm not going to be critical of you. But the truth is, it is a transitional agreement. It buys us 2 years. It doesn't commit us to anything in the future. And the truth is, that next 2 years is going to have to be used by an administration that is willing to talk across Parliament and do the sort of things that we should have done 2.5, 3 years ago, of actually getting a group of parliamentarians together from all sides, from all parties, in fact, from all the countries of the United Kingdom, and getting us to really talk about what future we're looking at. Because your point is really valid, which is, how do we build on 40 years of relationship that we've had with the European Union? How do we build on the things that it has added to the UK? And how do we get the best out of the future that will be a changed status, that will be a changed relationship, and that will not have the same level of oversight and control, but can still have very, very great cooperation, not just with the European Union, but with many countries around the world?
You both want to get to, perhaps, by definition, what you're talking about, a softer Brexit than the one the Prime Minister's been negotiating. The one that she's been talking about with her red lines. No, but it sounds like it. If you're going to seek the consensus of the House of Commons, you're hardly going to get a harder Brexit, are you?
Well, no, I think Brexit is Brexit. I mean, I'm not sure I buy the terms. I mean, you know, once you are not paying in, once you are outside the customs union, the single market, you know, which is...
But those are the red lines that would have to go if you consulted Parliament.
But that's what this deal does. It removes you from all of those. But what I'm saying is...
it leaves open the future relationship.
Well, but the future relationship is a very different question. And the difference in the question is, you're talking about now leaving all those. The future relationship is, what kind of a relationship do you want? Now, you can have customs agreements, as we do, for example, with the United States, with Canada, with Australia. You know, there are ways of having customs agreements with other blocs, and we do that. We have done that in the past, and I'm sure we'll do that in the future. Whether or not we'll do it as formally with the European Union or not, I don't know, but that's a conversation we need to have. What the free trade agreement looks like, whether it's as close as Norway's through an EFTA arrangement, or as remote as Canada's through a sort of CETA arrangement, that's the sort of conversation we need to be having. But that's the conversation that we can't have with one person in number 10, one government view, one single identity. This is something that, frankly, there's a reason there's 650 MPs. It's because there are communities around the country who do not see things the same way.
So where does that take us in terms of how this great consultation might work? You're not going to get the sort of thing you're talking about, a fully consultative approach to the future relationship under Theresa May. Are you? Could you sell that to Lisa? Could you say that's going to happen, or that it's going to happen under her successor?
Can I take you to confidence here, Gary? I don't think you're going to get it under either of the front benches. I mean,
where does that take us?
It takes us into, look, Brexit is a revolution. It's a revolution in our relationship with the European Union, of course, and that's the obvious bit. But it's also a revolution in the way we look at how we govern ourselves and how we look at ourselves as the United Kingdom. It's a real, Brexit came out of many things, but let's be honest, it wasn't purely out of whether or not we could, sell soap to the French. It was about how we interacted with those who have power over us, how those who have power over us are able to exercise it or not, what are our constraints and so on. And the truth is that this revolution is now challenging the very structure of our political system, the very nature of our party politics. And I'm afraid the front benches, the government of the United Kingdom for the last few years and the opposition of the United Kingdom for the last few years have not adapted to this changed circumstance. And,
You're nodding, Lisa. Where do you think that takes us? What Tom's talking about?
Well, it takes you to a complete reset in British politics.
But I don't even know what that means. I mean, is that...
Well, in the last few years, Parliament has proven itself completely incapable of coming together to search for common ground. We're set up in a manner that pits us into tribes that are adversarial, that challenge and argue and try to beat one another down until one side wins. Now, Brexit, in my view, is a revolution. But it's also a tug of war in a very real sense between people, largely those who voted to leave in constituencies like mine, who felt very much that they didn't have control or agency over their own lives, their families, their communities, the things that mattered, and people who had much more of that control and agency. And that latter group, the people who largely voted to remain, have in the last couple of years lost a lot of that agency and feel very, very strongly that goes right to the heart of what it means to be their identity, and goes right to the heart of what sort of country we're creating, one in which they feel they don't have a place. Now, this tug of war, because it's so fundamental and deep-rooted, is not going to be won by either side. The more that we tug, the more the other side will tug back,
so where does
and the thing will break.
Are you talking about a government of national unity or a rainbow coalition?
No, I'm talking about
backbenches getting together and
I'm talking
ignoring the front
about a completely
benches.
different approach to negotiating solutions to shared challenges.
And that could happen with the existing party structure?
I don't think it
or
can
do you think you have to
I don't think it
do
can
something
happen with
different?
the existing parliamentary structure, because there is very little space for that search for dialogue and consensus in Parliament. The closest that you come to it perhaps is through select committees, but largely it's entirely absent from that building. It's, you know, even the way that we're set up, we're in these individual offices behind closed doors. The doors, I mean, this is for people who don't come into Parliament. You wouldn't realise that we very often don't see one another or talk to one another for days, except when we're walking through the division lobbies, and usually walking through the division lobbies with people who already agree with us. I mean, the place is just not capable of looking for common ground, and that means that the whole thing has to be torn up and we've got to start again, because, you know, 98% of people, I think that politics is fundamentally broken, that the system isn't working. God knows who the 2% are that think it is.
They're sitting
but,
in House of Commons.
But there is a general consensus that this system is not working, and when this is over, if it's ever over, that system is going to have to change.
But you're not engaging with the idea of any sort of government of national unity. Certain people, some of them on select committees, who chair select committees, have talked about it in recent times. And isn't that the kind of thing you are probably going to need in order to have anything that looks like indicative votes getting adopted? You're not going to have Theresa May or Boris Johnson, who succeeds her, taking dictation from the House of Commons in the old style. It would require a different kind of management of the process, wouldn't it? You're nodding, Lisa. You're not nodding, Tom.
It requires a different management of the process. I'm just not sure that a government of national unity is what you need. What you need is a series of structures that enable us to search for common ground and come to a shared collective view.
So it's a stronger parliament.
So one proposal that Stella Creasy and I put forward that was backed by MPs from all political parties and crucially from different factions within the Brexit debate was about citizens' assemblies. So trying to have more tools in the democratic toolkit that help us to get to better, more sustainable decisions. And it's that sort of thing that Parliament largely is just incapable of accommodating at the moment, but it's going to have to get into the 21st century, frankly.
I'm not going to get into the details of citizens' assemblies because there's a debate as to how you would structure them, but the idea that politics can stay the way it is simply not true. And I think, you know, that the select committee format is an interesting one because it respects the party structure and the fact that people do make a binary choice when they elect people.
Do you have to declare an interest there?
Well, of course, I'm chairing the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, but the great thing about the Select Committee is that it's really not party biased. I mean, it's really not. You know, we've only had one vote, and it was one person was against and 9 were in favour of the motion. You know, it was it wasn't split on party basis, it was split on opinion basis, which is fine.
It's but it's a forced coalition, a select committee, in a sense.
No, you suggest it in the sense that people have to have groupthink. That's not true, but people have independent think. So you walk in there and you leave your tribal hat at the door, if you see what I mean. So, you know, the people who are sitting down around the Foreign Affairs Committee, they may be Labour, they may be Conservative, or they may be SNP, but that is not the tribe they're representing. What they're doing is they're representing the best interests of the House. Now, one of the things that we've done in the Foreign Affairs Committee that I'm, you know, particularly pleased has worked really well is we go around the country And we take the Foreign Affairs Committee around the country. And initially people say, well, why are you going to Birmingham with the Foreign Affairs Committee? You should be going to France or whatever. And our argument was, well, no, foreign affairs is about how British people deal with the abroad. That's what foreign affairs is. And it's not just about how Parliament deals with the abroad, it's how British people around the country. And too few people, exactly as Lisa was saying, have that engagement. And so what we were able to do is bring people in. And I have to say, the way that we have looked at foreign affairs is very different because of those assemblies. Now, of course, we all have a local sort of assembly when we go and do our surgeries and all the rest of it. And of course, I can give you a pretty good impression of what people in Tunbridge or Westmoreland or Edenbridge think. But I couldn't have done the same for Birmingham, and I couldn't have done the same for the Rhondda, and I couldn't have done the same for Southampton. And we're doing that. Now, I think Parliament has got to reach out much more, and we've spoken about, reorganising Parliament. I think a greater weight for the select committee structure. I think a greater...
Or American style, perhaps?
Well, the American style is actually more divided in a funny way, so I'm not sure I'd quite go down that route. But because it's much more partisan within, they're the lead members of various committees are ranking, the ranking Democrat or the ranking Republican, whereas our system is different. You're forced, if you want to be the chair of a committee, you're forced to seek election from across the House. If you only get your own party's votes, you probably won't win. In fact, you almost certainly won't win. You've got to reach out across the House. Now, and I think that's the way we've got to look. Now, I think that there's a real opportunity here because actually, funnily enough, for all the challenges that Brexit poses, it does actually offer a huge opportunity for this, which is this is a question so big, so different, that it really does challenge the very way that we think about politics, the very way that we think about engagement. And I think that, one could make arguments about how the last 2 years have gone that I'm not going to get into right now because
let's
I probably agree with Lisa.
Let's have a go at that.
Well,
on the sense that, do you think, in a sense, this issue of Brexit and maybe the particular style of Theresa May, though it's possible previous prime ministers might have fallen into the same trap, not reaching out, trying to do it with one party plus the DUP, that from the very beginning that was the flaw, and maybe she's driven this entire sort of, approach to destruction.
Bluntly, I think there's two elements of failure, and I would agree with you that not reaching out at the beginning and seeing this as a national challenge in the same way. The reason it was a referendum and not a parliamentary vote is because we realised it was a major national question beyond party, beyond, in many ways, even beyond Parliament. That was, that's one area. The other area is we've approached this as though it's a legalistic problem. It's not a legal problem. It's a problem of human relationships, of power dynamics, and of psychology. And instead, on one side we've had Barnier, who's been, approaching it like a Savoyard lawyer, where it's, it's detail. It's, he's been splitting up the record collection in a divorce deal. This is not the way you get a future relationship. Everybody's been so focused on how you split it up that we've forgotten about the fact that, we're going to have a relationship together for the next 1,000 years, and we've got to find a way of working together for the next 1,000 years. And if we don't focus on the future, if we just focus on how we split up the record collection, well, guess what? It's going to be acrimonious.
How do our party leaders come out of this, Lisa?
Well, I don't think any of us come out of this well. Party leaders or otherwise. I think the general sense out there in the country is that all of us are making a complete hash of this. We're talking past one another, we're not listening to each other. When I first got elected 10 years ago, I used to, the BNP was still around, the EDL was starting to grow, and you would always hear these sort of cries of betrayal and traitor at those far-right rallies. Now it's really commonplace to hear that sort of language bandied around in the House of Commons. And so we are destroying our democracy by the way that we've conducted this debate. And it's that serious, I think. People have completely switched off. They've completely lost faith in their politicians. Even people who, people tend to know their local MP or tend to be quite supportive of their local MP compared to the way that they feel about other politicians. But even that, I think, is starting to change and is coming under real strain because people are so frustrated and at times angry with our inability to deal with this. And I think it's tempting to say that it's all about Theresa May. I certainly don't think she should be let off the hook for the way that she's gone about this and is continuing to go about it. But actually, this is a much more longer term problem with British politics. We've seen it under successive prime ministers, we've seen it in successive parliaments. We've got a system of patronage that doesn't enable people to make free sort of expressions of their own views and their own experiences and their own constituencies. And you know, before we had the vote to leave the EU in my constituency, we had this very dramatic spike in support for UKIP amongst people who would never have dreamed of voting for openly racist parties. And before that, we had years of falling turnout from people who's not just them, but their parents and their grandparents had gone out and consistently voted in every general election since they've been given the right to vote. People have been telling us for a very, very long time that our politics is fundamentally broken and it's not delivering on the things that they want. And I agree with Tom. I think that this is a moment basically where the thing has collapsed. The people have had enough. It can't survive. And that is therefore an opportunity, because if we've learnt anything in the last few years, it should have been surely that this vote to leave the EU is a rejection of the system as it is. It's broken. We've got to move on. We've got to change it.
Does your leader look like someone who could lead that transformation of British politics, Jeremy Corbyn?
I think he's quite interested in different ways of sort of doing decision making. That's certainly true. He's got some history around that, you know, of trying to involve the public and engage with the public. He's much happier, frankly, when he's outside of Parliament than he is when he's in it. Well, especially at the moment.
What marks do you give him for the way he's handled Brexit?
Well, I think he's got a really difficult job on his hands, to be honest with you, because Labour particularly represents some of the most heavily Leave and heavily Remain voting parts of the country. And as a consequence, our dilemma is the country's dilemma. How do you speak for both? And how do you bring people back together? So he's had to walk a fine line in a debate that is very quickly been separated into black and white. He's dealing in shades of grey, and that is a very, very difficult thing to do. But frankly, it's an essential thing to do, because you cannot produce a sustainable settlement for this country that doesn't speak for both the 52 and the 48. It's just not possible.
Who's going to lead this democratic revolution in the Conservative Party?
We'll see.
Tom.
I'm afraid you've both been talked of as potential leaders. I'm sorry to give you that damning
kiss of death.
Yes, it's over.
Damning piece of news.
But the truth is, Gary, actually,
does anybody look like they're remotely going near this at the moment? The people who are talked of as prominent leadership contenders.
Some are beginning to talk about it. I'm not going to go into. No, I'm not going to, because
people in cabinet.
Some people are the sort of names that you would have heard in the sort of leadership bubble, if you see what I mean, are beginning to talk in sensible ways about this. Now,
about how we rethink our
Now, how sensible they are, I don't know. I've only had very, very early conversations, so there's really not much more than that to say.
Could you say candidly that they are truly living that message, or just talking it? When you look at what's happening in cabinet at the moment,
talking it at the moment.
When you look at people signalling from cabinet,
but Gary,
right-wing virtue signalling to Tory associations.
I'm gonna say they're talking it at the moment, which frankly is better than they were before. So let's leave it at that.
I think that's absolutely right. But also looking at your party from the outside in, I think some of the really interesting sort of noises are coming largely from the backbenches. So people like Robert Halfon, Neil O'Brien, you. I mean, there are, you know, there is an obvious frustration on the backbenches about a generation who are wedded to that old style of politics, and actually feels a bit similar in the Labour Party. Yeah. You know, if you look at people like Stella Creasy or Jess Phillips and the way that they approach politics, it's a very, very different approach to anything that we've seen before. And increasingly, it feels like there are people who don't feel that they
could be,
have come to Westminster to be part of the system. They've come to Westminster to change it.
But under your current party structures, I don't know about both of them, but you know, they've both been talked about in terms of how the membership might come after them and deselect them. It doesn't sound like a vehicle, your party, you know, some people might argue, for the kind of people you want to see charging ahead and getting at the front.
Well, first of all, let me say that it feels very different when I spend time in my CLP in Wigan. It feels very different to the narrative that it develops in the national media, because the membership largely is quite similar to the active members that we had before. But the newer members who've come in are quite passionate, quite enthusiastic. They're more likely to set up an energy co-op than sign a petition. They want to be part of that change. And so there is an opportunity for the Labour Party, I think. But the political party structures are as broken, frankly, as Parliament. I mean, if you join the Labour Party at the moment, you usually do it like I did because you want to change the world. And then very quickly you find yourself delivering soggy leaflets at 6 o'clock in the evening and debating standing orders and motions that go to conference but then just disappear off into wherever. And the levers just aren't there for people to pull, and there's a huge frustration around it. Now, we had this democracy review which very quickly then collapsed into a conversation about how to make it easier to deselect your MP, which was depressing, not just because I don't think most members do want to deselect their MP, but because it didn't deliver on any of that ambition or energy that there is. And when the dust has settled on this thing, if we do manage to get the agreement through, if we do manage to sort out the future trading relationship, there's going to have to be a real hard look at the political parties as well and the way that those structures work, because they're not fit for purpose either.
Does your party, Tom, look like it's the vehicle for all this exciting change that you're talking about? There's an awful lot of association bosses members who sound like they might want to vote for Boris Johnson as the next leader. Someone I think you've had occasion in the past to criticise quite heavily.
Well, my job was, as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, is to oversee the Foreign Office. So yeah, I have been critical of the Foreign Secretary. That is exactly the role of a committee chair.
I think you know what I'm talking about. We're not talking about little details of his approach to Thailand.
I've been very critical of some of the approach that the former Foreign Secretary had.
Across the board, and you think he's quite a dangerous figure in some ways.
Look, I've expressed myself, I think, pretty clearly on various individuals in the past.
But that could be the journey that your party's going on. My point is it the vehicle for this kind of change?
I don't buy that, Gary, and I don't buy that because I do go and speak at a lot of constituency associations around the country. I'm sure Lisa does the same. And one of the things that strikes me about the people who are involved in politics in the Conservative in the Conservative family is that they tend to be the people who are very active in the community. They tend to be the sort of people who are involved in, Rotary and the Lions. They tend to be the people who, help set up homeless shelters or help run church-based organisations and youth groups. They tend to be the sort of people who really want to be engaged. And one of the things that really strikes me again and again is actually, look, it is of course true that in some parts of our associations they are a bit more right-wing than the country at large. That is hardly surprising. It is the Conservative Party membership. That is kind of what you'd expect. But actually, in most of them, I've found an extremely open, receptive audience of people who are fundamentally interested in the future of our country, who have a deep passion for service, and who really want to select the right person locally and eventually nationally to lead our country to a better future for themselves, for their kids, and sometimes for their grandkids. I mean, that's hardly surprising, because if you're going to get involved in politics, as Lisa puts it quite rightly, and deliver soggy leaflets on a Wednesday evening, you're not doing it for your health. I mean, well, it's pretty good exercise actually, but you're not doing it for your health. You're doing it because you fundamentally think that some things in the country need to change, and you think that the country matters. And I have to say, I think that the Conservative Party, like all parties, has got issues of numbers and issues of membership. And, that's true, but it's fundamentally got a bunch of driven and engaged people who are doing really good things in their local communities. And the fundamental purpose of political parties, and people forget this, is that we are supposed to be the recruiting sergeants for public life. We're supposed to be going out there as members of political parties and finding the sort of person who you would like to represent you at national, county, borough and local level. I mean, that's what we're looking for. That we're looking for people who have an idea of service, who have a view that aligns, broadly speaking, with the party ethos, but who are fundamentally, passionately engaged in service and service of the community.
You're both pretty. You're smiling at me now, which is nice, but you're both pretty miserable fundamentally now, aren't you? I mean, in political terms.
I'm very happy here, Gary. It's a
miserable time.
It's awful. I mean, it's really awful. So on Monday we were in the chamber debating whether we should allow chemists to ration access to medication if we leave with no deal in a couple of weeks' time. I've got constituents who are diabetic. My sister's diabetic, actually, and hasn't slept for months. I've got constituents who are on dialysis who've been told to expect some disruption to their treatment. I mean, these are the things. I've got a child, actually, in Wigan who has a genetic disorder which is life-limiting and who was in line for a clinical trial in the EU, but is now probably not going to get it. These are the sorts of things that we're dealing with when we go home. And this is the reason why we're all pretty miserable. It's not just that the political parties are, split apart by Brexit. It's not just that we can't reach an agreement. It's that this is the thing that keeps me awake at 4 o'clock in the morning, and more importantly, this is the sort of thing that's keeping my constituents awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. And when they come to me, at the moment, I can't give them answers. So no, it's not a good time in politics. We're not a happy group of people, I think it's fair to say.
It's true, isn't it?
Look,
Well, I've just made Tom really sad. I'm sorry. He looks so sad.
sorry, Lisa.
We call it the Brexit face. Whenever you go and talk to anybody at the moment in politics, people are smiling and they keep going, and then you start talking about Brexit, and by the time you leave, the corners of their mouths are starting to droop.
Look, I mean, this is a moment of really serious national challenge, and we've got to take the right decisions. I mean, I hate to say it, Lisa, but this is why I'm supporting. This is why I'm supporting the Prime Minister's deal for all of its compromises. We are sent here from 650 parts of the United Kingdom to come and reach the best compromises we can to try and keep the national dialogue going. I mean, the focus has to be, for me, what is the best I can do for the people I am sent to serve? And sometimes that's not what you would like to see. Many people will know I didn't vote to leave, I voted to remain. But you've got to look at the world as it is and decide how to act from there. And the truth is, the decision has been taken. We are leaving the European Union. There are various ways in which we can leave it. There are various ways in which I wish we had conducted these negotiations from 3 years ago, but we didn't. And I'm here now sitting with you on the 20th of March, 9 days before departure, with a range of options before us. But one of them allows me to say, I will not close down the M26, putting in danger the jobs of people in West Kent.
The difficulty is, though, is that you don't have a party leader and we don't have a Prime Minister who's prepared to say the same thing. And for someone like me to trust her then to go off and negotiate the future of this country on which thousands of jobs in my constituency depend, when she's not prepared to do that, it's just far too big a gamble. It's part of the problem with Brexit, I think, is that we've got a series of choices on offer and all of them are problematic. There are no good choices at the moment. So I accept everything that you said, Tom, about the need to get some stability and certainty to avoid that prospect of chaos in 9 days' time. But the trouble is, what essentially she's asking me to do is to swap the prospect of real serious harm in 9 days' time for the prospect of really serious decades-long harm in my constituency in a few months' time. And having sat and talked to her about this role for Parliament in what comes next and a vote for Parliament in what comes next, and the fact that she's still completely unwilling to even countenance that tells me she's not serious about trying to find consensus, about trying to reach out across the House, about taking on board the concerns of people like me who say, well, hang on a minute, I've got thousands of jobs in food manufacturing that are at stake if we don't have a close economic relationship with the European Union. If we lost those jobs in Wigan, that is bigger potentially than anything that happened at the height of the mine closures, and we're still dealing with the consequences of that now, 25 years later. So, for me, this is not a straightforward, we've got to avoid the chaos in 9 days' time, because actually to vote through something without any guarantees or any leverage over what comes next just seems to me to be an equally irresponsible thing to do. All I'm asking her for is a vote. I mean, it just doesn't seem that unreasonable. And the fact that she's still unwilling to do it,
to where the future relationship is quite a big thing.
But Tom is right that there isn't a settled view in the House of Commons about what should come next. We've just had a bit of a discussion about a customs union versus a customs arrangement. That there isn't a view, and that conversation hasn't really started yet within Parliament, let alone with the EU. So I'm not asking her to be absolutely crystal clear about what comes next, because I think that would be unachievable at this stage. But what I am asking for is a reset of the way in which we conduct these conversations and a vote for Parliament at the end of that process.
Well, that I respect, and I have to say that I think is going to come whoever's in number 10 and whatever they choose, because the reality is the next stage of the negotiations is going to be much more focused on the future for obvious reasons, and it's going to have to run through various options, and it's going to have to come to various decisions. And I think if there's a lesson for anybody, whoever's sitting in number 10 in the next few months and years, it's going to be how on earth do you make sure that you avoid these sort of cliff edges where nobody in Parliament, nobody in government, and frankly nobody in the world knows what the trading relationship of one of the 6 top economies in the world is going to be like in 9 days' time.
We're 1,000 days since the referendum. 1,000 days from now, Lisa, will we still be talking about Brexit?
I mean, I think we will still be talking about Brexit in 1,000 days' time. I hope very much that we'll have moved forward.
I think Tom just had a Brexit face.
in terms of the withdrawal agreement. But the reason that I think we'll still be talking about it goes back to a point that you made a little bit earlier, which is that we skipped straight from this political earthquake in which a lot of people in every community around the country said that they wanted to shake up and fundamentally reset the relationship between the people and politics. And we skipped straight to the technical and legal aspects of that debate, you know, free movement, single market access, Northern Ireland backstop, all things that just genuinely, for many people around the country, they just think you've completely missed the point. Yes. This is not relevant, you are not listening. And they were telling us 3 years ago we weren't listening. I think there is just a genuine sense that we're still not. And until we start grappling with those major questions, we're not going to settle this.
The levels of control that people in my community, I'm sure it's similar, if not exactly the same, in towns like Wigan. I mean, bizarrely, towns like Wigan and towns like Tunbridge are not a million miles away from each other. They are large, serious, important towns that could easily become, if we're not careful, dormitories to larger neighbours. You know, they could easily be sucked out, us by London, you by Manchester. And the challenges that we're facing is that, you know, people do want control. They really do want control of their lives, and they're right to want that control. But that control is provided by any number of different things, including, you know, having a bus service that works so that you actually, when you're older, you can actually get out of the house without being able to drive. You know, having the ability to allow your kids to go to sports clubs and do any number of different things without you having to be the taxi service. You know, I mean, that's just one thing. You know, there's any number of different areas, and I think focusing on that change in the power dynamics of our own country is where the revolution needs to happen. Because actually, what we're fundamentally talking about is not, you know, how does the United Kingdom engage with Europe? We've been talking about that for the best part of 3,000 years. Sometimes it's gone well, 400 years of Roman cooperation. Sometimes it's gone badly, 200 years of Viking raids. You know, and we've had these relationships come and go. But what we're now talking about is how do we make sure that the next 700 years looks much more like the last 70 years than many other bunches of 70 years going backwards.
1,000 days from now, still talking about Brexit?
Yeah, well, look, we'll be talking about our future our relationships with the world. I hope, by the way, we'll be talking about our relationship with India. I hope we'll be talking about our relationship with Canada, about how we...
But it won't be sorted.
Nothing is ever sorted, Gary. That's life.
Some people say Brexit goes on and on and on and on.
Well, discussions as to how we deal with partners around the world goes on and on and on and on. We've been talking about this, you know, that's the nature of being a nation state. You're constantly talking about your relationships. That's why we have a permanent foreign secretary and not one that we appoint and then dissolve. You know, we're constantly talking about how we engage with partners around the world. But the real challenge for us now is how do we change the way we do political discourse so we actually do what we're meant to do, which is to give power to people through a democratic system and not give an illusion of power every 4 or 5 years when you hire or fire the people who you send to Westminster.
Lisa, Tom, thank you both very much indeed for sharing your thoughts on the reset button. And who knows, 1,000 days from here, where both of you will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.